Before I begin this morning, I want to offer my prayers to Vicki Odell and her mother this morning. As you may have known, Vicki was supposed to be sharing the pulpit with me today and relating her experience of being diagnosed with and treated for breast cancer in the last year and the journey she has made since then. Sadly, a few weeks ago, Vicki's mom was diagnosed with cancer herself, and in the last couple of days, her condition has grown more serious. So Vicki is, of course, where she needs to be at her mom's side in West Virginia, and I just want to offer our thoughts and prayers for Vicki and her mom and for their entire family. Fault lines. That reading from Robbie Walsh gets me every time. I've heard it, used it, heard Robbie read it many, many times, and I'm always so touched and moved by it. The story behind that reading is that Robbie was at home, in this case in the parsonage of the church where Carol and I and our family came from in Duxbury, Massachusetts. This was many years ago, and there was a minor earthquake. Not too common in Massachusetts, of course it can happen. And it was enough of a jolt that things were shaken and knocked off of the shelves, and of course it got Robbie thinking about what lessons that may hold and how that might speak to the fault lines that we all live over in our lives. So I want to share my story with you today about a fault line. A little over a year ago, my family and I were shaken by one of those fault lines. Our lives were invaded, sent off in a new direction, and indeed turned aside by a force we most certainly were not prepared for. That which I had trusted most and taken for granted my entire life, my body and my health, suddenly betrayed me, and my life in an instant fell apart. I know many of you are familiar with the circumstances that happened last year. Some of you aren't. So let me just recount some of the basics of what happened. Just before Thanksgiving, not this past Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving before in 2013, one morning, shortly after I got up out of bed, I felt sick and had a fainting spell. I was transported to the hospital, and initial testing revealed that I had some swelling in a couple of lymph nodes in my lower abdomen. And I'd been feeling a little sick to my stomach the few days before, kind of thought maybe I was getting a stomach bug. So at first it was thought that maybe that swelling was a temporary result of some kind of stomach or intestinal virus. But then after another CT scan, which was done, several weeks after I had started feeling much better, it revealed that the swelling had not gone down. So I had a biopsy. And that biopsy revealed that I had a type of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that would require treatment, in this case, chemotherapy. I can still remember the day that we received the results of that biopsy. We'd been waiting for what seemed like an eternity for the doctor to make that call. I remember that part of me was feeling impatient. Let's get it over with, come on. Another part was hoping the phone would never ring. and that the whole thing was somehow a bad dream. But then, of course, the call came, and I heard the words that I'll never forget. Your biopsy was positive for lymphoma. Carol and I were on separate phones in different rooms, so I couldn't see her face when we got the news. But I could hear her voice, and what I heard and felt from the very beginning of this journey that we've been on was a love and determination to see me through my cancer. And that love has never wavered, and it has, without question, saved my life. In that phone call, Carol asked questions, offered suggestions based on what she had already researched. You know, through this whole process, I've felt many times that she's more knowledgeable than my doctors, which has been very reassuring because, you know, you never know when a doctor might be telling you something. Maybe they're having a bad day, they got up on the wrong side of the bed, and man, Carol has been there and been on top of it. And I think what's been most reassuring is that it's been clear, and in her voice I could hear it, that throughout this journey that we were going to be proactive and in charge of my treatment. And like I said, she has saved my life. I don't know how in that moment on the phone that she was able to think so clearly, because I couldn't. As she and the doctor spoke, I could really only half, maybe not even half, listen, because I was finding it hard not only to focus, but, as I said before, just to breathe. I had heard before from many people who have received similar diagnoses that it can feel like the wind has been knocked out of you, and man, that was really true for me. I remember feeling so unsteady, shaky, confused, and so afraid. I can honestly say that I have never experienced fear like that, like I did in that moment and in the days and weeks ahead. Although I feel it less frequently now than I did then, my journey with cancer has, in many ways, been a roller coaster of fear and uncertainty. Fear about what the future might hold, and uncertainty about what it will hold. And something else happened to me in those days immediately after my diagnosis. I began to experience, really for the first time, my own mortality. Up to that moment, death had always seemed like something, that was far away, way down the road, well beyond my horizon of vision. But all of a sudden, I started to see a wall that I couldn't see over or seemingly get around, a wall that it felt like I was suddenly being pushed toward against my will. And the more I felt pushed, the more afraid I became. And there was something else about that wall. For some time after getting the news, I couldn't get past the feeling that something, I don't know if it was God or spirit or life, something was pushing me towards that wall. Up to that point in my life, I'd almost always felt, so very blessed. Blessed with good health, with 2 wonderful children. Blessed with a calling and a career that I love so much. And blessed with the most wonderful spouse and life partner anyone could hope for. But now, for the first time, I wondered and doubted how blessed I was. I felt as if those blessings were about to be taken away, and that for some reason, again, the word doesn't matter, whether it's God or life or the universe, were somehow now working against me. And I have to say, I'm still surprised I went to this place, because I've counseled people that this isn't true, but in that moment, I even thought, maybe I'm being punished for something. I didn't know what, but that's where my mind went. Thanks to Carol's strength and wisdom, within a few short weeks after receiving that diagnosis, I was under the care of a world-class oncologist up at University Hospital in Cleveland and had begun my first round of chemo. This was about the same time that those of you who were here last spring received that letter in the mail from me informing you of my cancer. Well, for the first few days after receiving that first chemo treatment, I felt pretty good and thought, hey, maybe I can do this. It's not too bad. Side effects were there, but they weren't too bad. But as the old saying goes, I was counting my chickens before they hatched. Within about a week after completing that first treatment, I started having some symptoms. And a pain in my abdomen eventually sent me to the hospital. And that, along with another issue that emerged during that time, kept me in the hospital for 10 days. In many ways, those 10 days were the low point of this journey and this story. As I had written in my letter to all of you, I was determined to keep working, to keep living, and to not let cancer take over my life. But here I was, merely 1 week after my first treatment, knocked flat on my back and in the hospital. I remember telling Carol over and over again, I can't believe this is what it's going to be like. And I was so worried that I was going to be forced to take a leave from all of you. And I knew that that would send my spirits so very low and really to the bottom. I'll have more to say about this low point and what helped me get through it in the next part of the sermon. For now, let me simply finish the medical part of this story. Once I got on the other side of those 10 days in the hospital, things turned around. Grace touched my life. My condition began to improve dramatically. I tolerated the next chemo treatment really well, although I didn't say that stuff about, hey, no big deal. And by the end of my fourth treatment, after just 4 months, a PET scan showed that I was cancer-free. I finished my 6-month course of chemo last August, and I've been feeling stronger and stronger every day. Of course, there are never any guarantees, but for now, that fault line has been sealed, and my life has truly, truly been blessed. So I want to spend the rest of my time this morning reflecting on some of the things that helped us, my family, and me as we made our journey with cancer. As I said before, that journey hit some pretty low points, and there were times when fear and despair were definitely in the driver's seat. But we got through. And although I don't know if our experiences offer any lessons for others whose lives may be falling apart, I want to tell you a little bit about what we experienced and what we learned. And the first thing to say is that from the beginning of our journey, even before we got the results of the biopsy, we tried to spend a great deal of time just being together. Carol and I took long walks and talked openly and honestly about how we were feeling and what we were experiencing. We talked about being afraid, about being sad, and about the possibility that our life together might not be as long as we had anticipated or turn out as we had expected. We were also able to talk to others, to our beautiful children, and to our parents. Their love and support meant everything, for we knew that no matter how dark or difficult our journey became, we were not making that journey alone. And this feeling, this knowledge of not being alone was especially powerful and important, for me at least, during those difficult days in the hospital. As I waited day after day to see if my body would rally, I have to say that I began to feel the presence of a love like no other I have experienced. Much of that love came from Carol and Carissa, who spent countless hours with me at the hospital, and from our son Chris, who offered his love over the phone from his home in Boston. And I have to say that that love also came from all of you, from your cards and your emails, from your prayers, and from the many candles you lit for me on Sunday mornings. I can remember one particular moment in the hospital when I was feeling especially down. As I said before, during my time there, I was so worried about my future here and the possibility that my health and my treatment were going to seriously interfere with my ministry. But in one of those moments when I was really, really low, I remember seeing across the room on a table some cards from you guys that Carol had lined up in a stack next to it. And as I looked over at all those cards, I could hear your voices saying, "Don't worry, it'll be okay. We love you and we're with you." I don't know how to describe it, but I had this overwhelming feeling of peace and calm that came over me. I just knew that no matter how bad things got, I had so much love, so much strength, and so much healing energy behind me that I was going to find a way through. You know, and it's not the case that receiving all that love and support cure fear and uncertainty. Fear and uncertainty, they never go away. They never disappear. They are part of life and always will be. But through my journey, I have come to believe with all my heart, man, that love is stronger than fear, and that it can prevent fear from taking over your life, even when your life is falling apart. My experience also taught me something, helped me see something about faith, about spirit, about God. As I mentioned earlier, when I was first diagnosed, I had this feeling of being pushed towards that wall by God. And rather than coming to my aid when I most needed it, it felt as if I was being abandoned and that all that I held dear was being taken away. But as I lay in that hospital bed and experienced the power of all that love, I realized that I wasn't being abandoned or having my blessings taken away. Rather, those blessings, that was God for me. That was Spirit for me. The more love and support I received and experienced, the more I came to know that God doesn't give us cancer or delight in our suffering. Rather, the holy, that all-powerful love is right there in the arms of those who hold us. It's right there in those cards and notes that we send and in those candles that we light. And God is most certainly present in the love that makes it possible for us to get through when things fall apart. I also want to say a word about the power of prayer. Not long ago, Carol shared with me her experience with prayer during this time. Prior to my illness, I think it's fair to say that prayer wasn't a big part of her life or her spiritual journey. But after my diagnosis, and I think during those really hard times when fear and anxiety were at their highest, she prayed. And one night, as Carol prayed for me to recover, something extraordinary happened to her. She experienced a sense of peace and reassurance that somehow things were going to be okay. And that sense of peace helped her get through. And I can say without hesitation that her peace and reassurance rubbed off on me and helped me heal. And as my condition began to improve, something else in me was awakened that I hadn't expected. This deep and profound gratitude, deep at a level I had never felt before. I came to see and feel just how blessed my life is, including my life with cancer. Blessed by the unconditional love of my family, blessed by the care and concern of friends, blessed by my doctors and nurses who helped heal my body, and blessed by a church community that shared more love and support with me than I could have ever imagined. There's a quote that I once heard or read from Dr. King. I normally use Dr. King during social justice, but this one fits so well my experience. He said, "Only when it is dark enough can you see the stars." That's what I saw and experienced during my illness. The most beautiful and breathtaking stars of love and kindness and generosity and compassion. So I simply want to conclude this morning by saying that as I learned after being diagnosed with cancer, we all live our lives on those fault lines that Robbie Walsh talked about. Man, they can shift at any moment and lead our lives in directions we never imagined, and that, quite frankly, can terrify us. I wish I could tell you there's a solution or a strategy for preventing those faults from shifting or opening up, and for keeping our lives from falling apart. But there isn't. But what I can tell you is that, as Robbie said near the end of his meditation, there is a web of life and love that can get us through. A web that holds us when we're afraid, a web that reassures us when we're uncertain, and a web that comforts us when we are hurting and falling apart. That's the web that I discovered as I journeyed with cancer. That's the web that held me, that loved me, and that got me through. I just want to end by saying thank you to my beautiful family, to my friends, and to all of you for being my web and for getting me through. Blessed be, and thank you so very much for listening.